Corrective action, preventive action, or CAPA, is often treated as a compulsory exercise in MedTech companies. But how can we make it a tool for continuous improvement or even sustainability? To explore this question, I invited Georg Digel. Georg is a quality professional specialized in CAPA and the founder of Elevate CAPA. He has spent a good chunk of his career dealing with CAPA processes and supporting MedTech companies in creating value with CAPA. In this episode, you're going to learn why CAPA is one of the most misunderstood processes in medical technology and the most common CAPAs and non-conformities that auditors will find, and how to build a CAPA system that prevents problems instead of just documenting. My name is Lucas Pianigonda, and I've helped over 40 MedTech companies to become more sustainable with plastics, and here's our discussion. Hi, Georg, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lucas. Thanks so much for having me here.
Yes. So, Georg, you're an expert in CAPA. What is CAPA and why is it so central to medical quality systems?
Yeah, always a strong word with expert. Let's say I'm someone who has enough scar tissues to talk about it. Let's phrase it like that. So, CAPAs, there are like two answers. And answer number one is we do it for compliance reasons. If you're new to this world, we are in a regulated environment. Due to that, we have certain ISO standards to comply to, let's say, regulations. And one part, something that's written in there is also this thing, CAPA. That's like the more boring answer to that. The, I think, more interesting answer is CAPA is something that allows your company to identify the unacceptable risks you have within your company, or maybe the systemic issues you have, and then to identify what's causing them and giving you something to prevent that from happening again or in the first place.
Okay. So is the first one or the second understanding more common in MedTech?
It depends on the maturity of the company. The bigger the company gets, I think the more understanding is there that you do it to improve your product, your processes, your QMS system. For startups or smaller companies, I think there's sometimes this expectation of, yes, we have to do it for the next audit to prove that we have some records to show, or maybe you got the finding in the external audit. Now you have to do a CAPA with that. That's just the experience I had. I've been a consultant right at the start of my professional journey, and we had a lot of small businesses where the father was the CEO and the son was like the head of marketing and sales and the uncle was the manufacturing head, right? And this is like more the understanding for them. We have to do CAPA for the sake of audits.
Okay, good. So let's take a step back. What is CAPA actually, and walk us through a process or a typical setup of such a process, and what does it have to do, and how does one execute such a system?
Sure. So it's an acronym which stands for corrective action and preventive action. And the usual workflow is that you identify a quality issue within your company. It could be that your product is not meeting specification. A really easy example is a part should be 11 centimeters long, but it's 15 centimeters long. Let's take something like that. So that's the identification part. After that, it's your initial assessment. So where you say, is this like acceptable? Is it really a non-conformity? What's the impact of that? And then you go more into deep dive questions. So how often does it happen? And do we know what to do it and not? And at one point in time, your process should tell you, hey, that's just a non-conformity. We correct it and that's it. Or no, that's a bigger issue. So we go into root cause investigation and try to identify what's the reason, why does this keep happening. Once you have your root cause, you generally go into an action planning phase where it's about identifying which actions will stop this from happening again. And together with that, you want to have an idea about how to show that your actions worked. So this is usually verification of effectiveness. You implement your actions, you verify that they worked, you have objective evidence for everything that you told you said, you document your record, and then you close it. That's like a super fast explanation of how the ideal life cycle looks like.
Okay. I mean, it makes all sense. We identify an issue, we understand what the issue is all about, where it comes from. We identify the impact, how bad is it actually, and then we plan actions to, first of all, get rid of the current issue and make sure that it doesn't happen again. But I think the problem of interpretation here is that, like, what is a significant issue? Because if you run an injection molding machine, sometimes you'll have out of specs parts, and that's maybe just a few percent. So every time I have a little bit of scrap, I start a CAPA now. Is that really the thing that we should be going for? Because if we start for every little issue that happens somewhere, a CAPA, then we will have 1 million CAPAs and nothing gets done in the company anymore. And then on the other hand, if you don't do anything, you can just like outsource your quality management and risk management to the customer, basically. Just like, okay, everything is CAPA now, and we do not make sure that the quality is done right in-house. So, like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think what you just painted as a picture is the reality for most companies, that they gravitate towards one of the extremes. It's either that they never raise a CAPA at all, or let's say nothing in-house. Just there's the notified body coming once a year and they get 2 findings, and that's the only time when they do a CAPA, right? I've been with companies that do that. Or the other extreme, which you pictured with 1,000 open CAPAs. In our industry, there's this term death by CAPA. And that's exactly what happens, right? Oh, scrap. One scrap part, CAPA. One internal audit finding, CAPA. Missing signature on a training record, CAPA. So the annoying answer that I will give you now is that there's no good answer. So as you stated, you need to find a balance. And with balance, what helps me is to watch for what does the industry do in general, right? And there are some expectations for when to open a CAPA, where it's very easy to say, okay, in these cases, yes, do one. And for that, it's like the external audit finding that I mentioned before. If you sell into the States or any other countries where you have a regulatory agency coming to you and you get an 483, right, out of an FDA inspection, that's usually a CAPA. If you have product on the market and you have like a big field action, recall, all of that, that's usually CAPA. Complaints where someone gets seriously injured, CAPA. Super easy to give this answer for a few N equals 1 events. With that, I mean, the risk is so high, so unacceptable, you raise the CAPA and you don't care whether it's like a systemic issue. So does it happen once a year or twice every day? It doesn't really matter. You still open the CAPA. I think your question is towards everything that is at the other side, right? So what, like with scrap rates, is 3% scrap rate good or bad? Or is it 10 or is it 20, right? Would you raise a CAPA at all for scrap rates? And this is where your company has to sit down and understand, what the heck are you even doing as a company? So what are your processes? How is your QMS set up? And what's the product that you manufacture? What's the risk associated to this product? So if you have a risk class 1 device, you might have a different understanding than for a class 3 device, right? And at this point, my suggestion is always to map out, these are my processes. These are the quality events that could happen in my processes. And for these type of events, I have to consider a threshold, at which point I would open a CAPA. And for these types of events, it's fine for me to say I will do correction only, right? So there's this exercise that you should definitely do in the beginning. And after that, maybe once or twice a year, to refine your strategy, to understand, this is what I'm looking for. In these instances, I open a CAPA, and for these not.
Okay. Good. So you mentioned that there are like big events, like findings and audits and recalls and complaints where people get hurt. Those would be something where you would be doing a CAPA always. And then like the lower impact cases, you would have to apply judgment depending on your device, on your company, on your processes. What are some typical findings that you get from auditors?
So we are lucky in terms of the FDA, how transparent it is with warning letters and 483s, all of that. So the common themes over the last years were that procedures are inadequately defined, but this doesn't give you anything, right? So it's always like this standard phrasing. And if you go through the warning letter or 483, then you see that many companies struggle with the setup of the overall QMS, but it's just the CAPA system that got the finding, right? Or like the chapter in the old QSR was always against CAPA. So if you go and do like a meta-analysis of all these findings, it's always about the company struggles to analyze these signals and events across all the data sources, right? And you just talked about that before, like these other cases where you have to make up your own mind. I'm going to give you an example. If you look at your non-conforming product and you see that you have, 3 product errors every month, is this enough to raise a CAPA? I don't know, right? But gut feeling, no. Independent of what the NC is, gut feeling, no. But then you look at the complaint and you see, I get a certain type of complaint that is a reportable event. And most likely it's associated to these 3 NCs that I have every month. That's a different story, right? And this is a case if, let's say, an auditor comes, or more the FDA, because they have a different approach to that. If they see that you didn't define how you do your analysis across your system, that's what you get a finding for, right? But it's mostly written as procedure inadequately defined. But the procedure is not exactly the problem. It's the execution part of it.
Okay. Good. So people struggle with analyzing what I should actually raise a CAPA for. Good. We had this discussion before, and you mentioned that it's like in some cases you would only do corrective action and not preventive action. And to be a little provocative, I think the industry puts a lot of emphasis on the corrective action and not too much on the preventive action. So it's just like, I fixed the problem when it occurs, and in the end, then it will happen again next month. And on the other hand, that you also can be a little provocative or even more provocative and say, you outsource your risk management, because you should be doing risk management when you set up your production processes and design your product. And everything that is not covered in that risk management, that will be a CAPA at some point. So you will find the unacceptable risks that you didn't look at when you designed the product in production when you have CAPAs like this. And I think people should be focusing more on the risk management, or that will be my suggestion, and then the preventive action instead of just correcting everything that went wrong. What's your take on that?
It's not so easy to give a good answer on that. And the reason for that is you can't really picture every failure mode, or let's say every misuse of your product in a meeting room, right? You could have the smartest people there. You could have your whiteboard and your brainstorming, and you did the, market research, all of that. But can you really foresee every type of issue you could have with your product, with your processes, which are linked to design and all of that? In the ideal world, yes, you and I and other people would sit in a room for a week, and then we know how our process looks like, potential risks with this process, and we would say that's something we have to mitigate, and we need to make a strategy up to prevent this from happening, all of that. If we do a lot of thinking, due to our design, we would prevent 99% of issues to happen in the first place. And what we can't design out, maybe we come up with good measures to identify it earlier, or do like real preventive action. The reality of things that I've seen is that many companies kind of slide into the medical device world and started selling products with an immature quality mindset or understanding. And so they got a great product and they have proved that it works, but they never really thought about design or documentation the way you'd expect it in our industry, right? And so they kind of have proof that they have a good product, but they can't show you any documents. And I'm not sure whether risk management would have really uncovered that, because so much is also trial and error, especially in this research phase, where I'm not sure whether you have the bang for the buck. If you just, let's say, put all resources into risk management and don't have any resources for marketing, sales, and working with your customer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, or you could also think of switching it around and say, okay, let's do minimal risk management and make a risk analysis that is very bare bones. And then in an iterative testing process, like apply the CAPA process to our development. So like every iteration, something happens, something bad happens that we don't want. We apply the CAPA process and try to fix that and build that into the risk management. That would be like risk management by CAPA during the development process. Would that work, and is that applied in reality?
I don't think I've seen any CAPA initiated based out of this initial development cycle, right? I think they would do it as part as the design process, and you have some reiterations and you had user inputs and you see, oh, we kind of fulfilled it, but it would hurt the patient, right? So I would never raise the CAPA for that, as long as the product is not like a manufacturing on the market, things like that. And obviously, just manufacturing a product without doing any critical thinking or just designing the product is stupid as well. You mentioned the balance earlier. We need to have experts there. We need the research and the papers that we can rely on in terms of what we do. And that's also the reason why we have so many standards. A lot of knowledge is documented in standards, right? And if we comply with them, let's say we iron out at least 60, 70% of the issues we could have. And if we do proper risk management, maybe we identify 10 or 20 cases more, right? I just don't think you can identify everything before the product is in actual usage. And this is also what your post-market surveillance and all of that is for, right? You look at, what did I identify initially? How does it behave in real world? Does my analysis fit or not? Do I need to adjust things? You mentioned earlier, if you miss a few risks, now you have to CAPA for it. Update your risk management files and risk summary sheets. I think that's like the more practical approach, right? Obviously, try to think of everything that could go wrong. Don't manufacture a product that requires sterility, but you didn't account for clean room or areas like that, white areas. That would be stupid, right? But don't overshoot after a certain point, because otherwise you won't have any product to sell.
The reason that I ask these questions is that you mentioned in the beginning that there are two camps. One is the continuous improvement camp, and the other one is the we do it because we have to do it camp. And I'm strongly in favor of the first one, because if you have to do it something, you might as well do it for a purpose. Because if you just do it because one has to do it, it's if you think you don't have to do something that is of meaning and purpose to your product and the quality. Like under any regulatory requirements, you can argue it the way usually if you have good reason to do so. So like, let's take the example with the scrap rate. It doesn't really help if you have a scrap rate of 0.5%. And every few months, I have a few parts that I have to throw away because that's just like my process capability. And if any auditor comes to you and says, but why didn't you do a CAPA? It's like if you're there and says, okay, we did this analysis and we are of the opinion that this is not relevant. And here is the documentation that shows that we have looked at it and we did the judgment. Then there's nothing they can say. It's like they can still argue with you and say, but I think it should be a CAPA. But usually you can argue with them. Even with the FDA, you can argue. You have to have good arguments. You have to have documentation. You have to have, I'd say, data. But even then, if you don't think something is applicable to you, they want you to think. They don't want you to just blindly follow whatever it is told to you. They have to, or you have to have the quality mindset and apply judgment for your own product. Therefore, if you have to do something from a regulatory requirement, you might as well make it useful. And what I'm very interested in is how can we use this tool that we anyways have to do, as you already laid out, in order to make your products continuously improve and make them better for cost, better for processability, better for scrap rates, better for sustainability. Because in many things that we just do because we have to, there lies a lot of value. It's like documentation is one thing. It's like many R&D engineers spend more time documenting than actually developing something. And CAPA is, I have the feeling that CAPA could be one of those tools where you can unlock a lot of value, but most people don't. What's your take on that rant?
I think I'm going to give you an answer that's going into a slightly different direction, but bear with me. The first part for me would be to make the company understand that you don't have to wait for a CAPA to improve your product or your processes, right? That's like the very first thing. And this is going hand in hand with the continuous improvement or continual improvement mindset. So if you hire people who try to improve their processes they own in the product without you having to tell them, by the way, we are in a regulated industry. We have requirements. We have to do NCs and CAPA and internal audits, right? If you find people who genuinely care about being better, that's already a huge win. Then you don't have to instill this mindset into them. And the part after that is to be very clear on when you raise CAPAs and why, right? So the companies that are overwhelmed with the CAPA system usually didn't, from my experience, right, didn't put enough thinking into why do we do the CAPA for these instances, right? It's kind of, you look at the record and you don't understand why did it go to the CAPA system, and then you ask them, and yeah, there was this one project and we didn't get the budget and we raised the CAPA for that because then we had this intention and now we got the budget basically, right? And it's nonsense. Why do you put this on your company? Right. And then it's the CAPA that's neglected for 5 years and you have to explain it in an FDA inspection. Good luck with that. Right. So to give you now an answer more towards your question, if you have the emphasis on preventive action, let's say, right, that you give your company opportunities to identify, hey, something is going wrong here or could go wrong here. Can we do anything to prevent this from happening? Right? That's like the essence of the preventive action, that you're proactive. You don't wait for the issue to happen, but you do something before the issue happens. If you have a company that does more preventive action than corrective action, and in the other instance, if you have a corrective action CAPA, so the NC happened, the issue happened, and you do corrective action, if you can say, hey, this underlying issue, could it happen at another similar process, or if you're in a multi-site setup, we had this issue in site A, could it also happen in site B? Maybe. Let's do it there as a preventive action, right? Let's say it's 2 QMSs, then it could be a preventive action. So if you get your people towards this setting, that they think more about preventive action and also in transferring this knowledge to unaffected processes, products, all of that, I think then you have a strategic tool that does what it's intended to do.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for those insights. It was pretty funny. I mean, I have a few takes on that. Number one is, yes, if you make it very difficult for people to get stuff approved, then they will abuse existing systems to get what they want, basically. And CAPA could be one of those systems. And then the second thing is, like you mentioned, hire people who want to improve things. But like we're a regulated industry. And one other regulatory requirement is that you have to do change management. And change management is often made such a pain that it prevents a lot of this continuous improvement, because it's just everything gets bogged down in meetings and impact assessment. It's like death by analysis. And I mean, maybe that's also what you described with the meeting room and foreseeing everything. Like if you want to implement the change, that's significant cost and effort of people that will go in somewhere. So usually, like, you hear that sentence a lot and I cringe every time I hear it. It's like, it's compliant, don't fix it. And what's your take? How can we improve on that front? Because that will probably improve a lot of the preventive action that you just said. Because if the pain of going through a change is so great versus the thing that we actually improve, we won't do it. So there's two things that can happen. Is like either the pain has to grow from like not doing the stuff, or the pain has to be lessened by doing the change. And I'm in favor of the second one, because then we improve faster.
I think we need to make it as simple as possible, right? And for that, I made the experience that quality people tend to over-engineer stuff because maybe they're also like blue people, right? With this color theory, like blue people are really analytical and they only see the risky stuff that could happen. And that's perfect for this job, right? But it's, let's say, sometimes a challenge for progress. And you can think about Elon Musk what you want, but I think he has a great approach to simplifying procedures and processes. And that's like challenge every requirement in terms of why is it there? And if you don't know why it's there, ask who made it up, right? And what you often find is if you look at these processes, like for change assessment, and you always find one step where it's like, but why is this step there? Right? And no one has an explanation. And then you have like a colleague who was with the company for 30 years. And then he says, yeah, because we got this one finding back in 2001 and the auditor said it must be there. So we put it in there as one bullet point. And that led us to, I don't know, doing always this stupid step that doesn't bring any value. Right. And that's happening with many procedures that we have requirements in there because the person who made the process wanted it that way. But it's like a subjective approach. He or she just wanted it, but it doesn't have to be there in order to be compliant, right? So that's like my take. Make it as simple as possible for the people who want to improve things, because otherwise you will get this lazy and resistant company that doesn't want to do anything anymore with quality.
Yeah, I think there's also a little bit of like the social aspect of being in a company, and then like it being in a regulated company and being in a bigger company sometimes. It's people want to be safe. And, you know, if you're not confident in what you do or you do not understand the problem, you tend to be conservative. And then you tend to add things you don't need. It's like I can make an example, like master batch change for something that is not contacting with a patient. It's just a color change. And we had the supplier that has discontinued, or like the sub-supplier has discontinued the pigment, and the supplier found another pigment that is exactly the same CAS number, which is the chemical identification. And he tested it, we tested it, we know it works. It's the same color, we find it acceptable, and then you raise the change. And then concerns start to appear. And how do you get rid of those concerns? That's the difficulty. And then you spend more time arguing why the change is no problem than just sampling and validating the stuff. So I think having lean processes and having simple processes can add a lot to it. And maybe to bring it back to the topic of CAPA, what do you think an ideal process would look like for a lean CAPA? Who owns it? How fast should a non-conformity or a CAPA be closed? And how does such a system look like in an ideal world?
I think there are kind of two camps. And camp number one would like to combine NC and CAPA as one process, right? So every quality issue within your company is identified as an NC. And then you do some evaluation and then you say, oh, this NC gets CAPA on top, or you close the NC after correction, if applicable, right? That's, let's say, camp one. Camp two has separate processes, and they would say, hey, there's one process that does the NC, and the NC process is like a feeding system to CAPA. I think your company needs to decide which approach they want to go first. So is it like one combined NC CAPA process, or is CAPA an own process? And then you have like feeders, non-conforming product, or process NCs, complaints, all of that into the CAPA. But what doesn't change is a lean process for me is clear about the fact how you identify issues. So you understand if something is going wrong, you have a requirement and it's not met, that your company has an easy time identify those type of issues. And then you also have a clear initial evaluation. So this initial evaluation is ideally risk-based, and it tells you that's what currently happened to your company, tells you the next step is technically a correction, right? Because if you have an NC, most of the times it needs to be corrected, or it's so significant in terms of risk, or it happens too often, so it's a systemic issue, we go into the CAPA system. And if it's in the CAPA system, it's also, let's say, easy in terms of this is what you do to identify the root cause. That's what you do to come up with meaningful actions and effectiveness criteria. And that's how you document that you did everything and can close it. In terms of ownership, I'm a big fan of assigning it to the function who has the most interest to solve the issue. So in other words, the function who caused the issue should also resolve it. And it links back to hire the people who care about quality, or let's say about improvement. Let's say if I own supply chain, I'm wired as a person that's my process. I want it to work. And if I see that I have a lot of defect packages and stuff like that, I would say, hey, what's happening here? I want to solve it, right? But sometimes you have this, I don't know, developments at companies where it's like, yeah, but your quality, you should own and solve my issue for me, right? And quality gets all CAPAs as ownership despite not knowing anything about the area. I think that's where things go wrong, just from my point of view.
Yeah, it's sometimes difficult to do what you just described. I understand where you're coming from, but I also understand that if you have production and you have a problem that works in production, and that is basically the biggest problem they have. And for example, let's take a material doesn't work, or like one lot of the material produces bubbles, for example, and 25% scrap rate. It's like a KPI of production is down. Like they have the biggest interest, but they have no capability solving it. Because it's a material problem, you need to go to the supplier and identify what's wrong, identify, can we even do something about it? Or worst case, evaluate the new material. And number one, the production, like they have not the capability to actually solve the problem. They have the biggest interest. However, they also have no time because their function is production. And what I often see is that improvement of the system is very often sacrificed for day-to-day work. Like this is also for development. If you let it happen, it's like life cycle cases will eat up all your innovation. If you want to. Like if you don't strategically cut out time for people, for like entire teams to focus on new product development, they will focus on every other stuff that is just urgent and not important. Or urgent and important always beats everything, and urgent beats usually important. But you should also focus on important stuff that is not due tomorrow. And yeah, so that is my take on it. But I understand that like having it with quality just bloats quality, and then you hire someone who has quality understanding but zero understanding of whatever technical expertise there is. And then having it a team is also adds the complexity of communication. So how do we actually make sure that stuff gets solved and not just documented and raised? Like, how do you do that? Because like someone needs to be held accountable, because the person, whoever has the ownership, needs to take over that ownership, because like they have a million conflicting other tasks that they should be doing. And like, how do you make sure that stuff actually that gets done versus just documented?
Yeah. For me, it starts with management attention, right? Because if your company has serious quality issues and your management is fine with functions arguing about who's owner, who's working on it or not, if management doesn't escalate or let's say decide what we'll do now, then you're at a company where the quality culture is just not where it needs to be, just from my point of view. So management attention doesn't always have to be at CEO level or like the, I don't know, how N-1 and N0, all of that. It doesn't have to be there, but it's also enough if the functional owners, like, I don't know, department manager, whatever they're called at your company, if they are aligned on, if we have a CAPA or quality issues, it's clear that this is a business priority. And then you have the discussion on who is working on that. And I don't care if quality is like the CAPA owner and then someone from manufacturing is the technical SME, or whether it's the other way around. It needs to be clear, hey, Lucas, you are the technical expertise, whatever expert, whatever you're doing right now, stop it. And Georg, by the way, you will coach him through the whole CAPA, because let's say you know how to do a CAPA, Georg. Lucas, you're the expert on the area. You solve this CAPA now. And with that, you have like a name and a clear due date, right? So let's say most companies say the CAPA should be closed in 1 year. It's an arbitrary goal. You could say 3 months, you could say 2 years, but let's say, okay, Lucas and Georg, you now have 1 year to solve this CAPA. By the way, Lucas, I talked to your manager. He's totally fine. You give all your tasks to Sophie. She will take care of your other project. Georg, you don't do anything else, just this CAPA. And what you will find is that's a different feeling, because your manager said, by the way, you do it now, right? Especially with bigger companies, there's often this situation where no one gave me the task, so I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to sit it out, which is the worst thing that can happen for you, because the issue is maybe getting bigger and bigger. And once you and I work on the CAPA, we will find out in the beginning, it fills our whole day. But after a certain time, we wait for an approval. Now the actions are in implementation, and we are more like project managers, but not doing like 8 hours CAPA every day, right? So there will definitely come a point in time where the workload gets less and you can go back into your old projects and me more in my projects. But someone has to keep oversight over the tasks and due dates, right? And this is how you can get things done and still not say, Lucas, you're just doing CAPAs, and Georg, you're just doing CAPAs.
Yeah. I mean, what you just described sounds very beautiful, but like in my personal experience, this is not what's happening, because people have, and here we see like that these quality topics, they're so much about mindset and culture and how you treat each other and how you have a decision culture in your company. Because what happens often is that politics is played. Because, okay, if I get the CAPA, like my capacity is reduced and someone of my people has to do it. But all other goals that I got before, like they don't go away. It's like, it's not like give something in and take something out. It's just you do it on top. And you're not rewarded for it appropriately. So what happens a lot is that people will do what they're rewarded for. And if a goal, a KPI, whatever, is applied, then they will try to optimize for that KPI because that is what they're rewarded for. And that explains why production wants the problem fixed instead of shutting down the production for a week and to fix the problem for good. But also, for example, if you have someone in development who focuses on material and could solve the production problem, make the company millions probably, they have the incentive to develop new product because that is what is in their goal statement and that is what their KPI says. So they have no incentive to do it, and they will fight to not do it because it will take away resources and time that they can dedicate towards what they're actually rewarded for. And this is also the reason why people, and this is what the feeling that I have, is like in change management, it came up before. They want to defend that. They want to defend the change because that means work in their day-to-day life that they're not going to be rewarded for. And this is, number one, we should stop doing work that is not meaningful and does not contribute to the company's success. And number two is we should clearly identify like who should do what in order to bring the company forward. And reward people for bringing the company forward. And I have no real solution to do that in a bigger organization, because the bigger the organization gets, the more this game is being played. Like in a startup environment with 10 people, people are usually very accountable. And you can very much argue for, okay, I'm doing that now, I can't do the other stuff. But yeah, the bigger organization, the more that problem happens. And it's how do you stay lean, decisive, and fast at a big company? That is probably the management problem of forever. So what's your take on like big company versus small company in terms of CAPA process? Are there differences?
The thing that you just described is unfortunately very true. And that's also why I said it starts and ends with management, right? Because you at the bottom end can care as much as you want. If, let's say, the incentive or the reward is to achieve business strategy or objectives, quality will always be deprioritized, right? And with smaller companies, I would say challenges are very similar. It's just that because the communication way is much shorter, or let's say, or the people are still closer to management is still closer to the daily business. They see these issues on a daily matter too. In bigger companies, management is also like, or messages get filtered out by each reporting line. And again, what is red at the bottom floor is like super green and sparkling at top level, right? I just think you as management have to make up a path for your company that rewards people who care about quality and solving issues and all of that, right? And that's easier said than done, because I've been with companies where everyone got the goal of doing one work that was associated to quality improvement, right? But it didn't result in any tangible outcome, I would say, right? The discussions have still been the same. So I just think that you can create some infrastructure within a company that shows that we want people who solve issues, we want people who close CAPAs on time, right? And these could be either special career paths where it's clear, hey, you can achieve that and that and that at our company if you show that you can identify issues and solve them and close a CAPA on time the first try, right? So that you have incentives around that. You have a role, and the role is to close NCs and prevent NCs, close CAPAs on time, all of that. And if you hit certain goals, you can have a team and build a team and all of that, right? So you have this career trajectory. And on the other side, if you have your business and it's manufacturing, maybe you need one or two roles that just work on continuous improvement of your processes. And it doesn't mean the only thing they do is CAPA, but maybe their overall goal is to identify what goes wrong within your function and improve it. But if there's like an NC or CAPA, they're the first ones to solve it because that's part of their job, right? And that's a decision. It's not for you and me or like the quality people. That's for management and the HR team, because they have to build all of that out.
Yeah, that really sounds like a good plan. So what advice would you like to give to MedTech companies when it comes to CAPA?
Focus on three things. The three things are how your company identifies quality issues and then say that's an NC or that's a CAPA. Then focus number two is how well you execute the CAPAs. So here, try to understand how thorough are your root cause investigations, how clear are your problem statements, how good is the overall documentation. And the last part is think about metrics and governance models. So how do you identify CAPAs that are overdue or late? Or if you see that you have a certain problem with a product, how do you escalate it on higher level? Because maybe you see you have an overall issue with all of that, right? So if you can focus on these three areas, and once you solve that out, you already did an amazing job.
That really sounds amazing. Thank you very much for your insights, Georg. Do you have any last words?
Nothing to add from my side, but one more time, thanks again for having the session with me.
Yes. So it was a pleasure to have you. So this was Georg Digel from Elevate CAPA. And until the next time.
See ya. Thanks, Lucas.